Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone. Today we've got Tabassum Siddiqui joining us, who is an expert on the topic of domestic violence. Welcome Tabassum. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to have you.
Jazakallah, thank you so much for having me.
So please go ahead and introduce yourself to our community, your background, what work you do, how come you have so much of knowledge in the specific topic, etc.
Sure. I am, I was born and raised in America, and I have worked in the social services field and also the parenting field, and have a lot of personal experience and work experience working with domestic violence victims. I was on the board of a Muslim women's shelter for a few years and also volunteered at the local masjid, and saw a lot of clients for about 9 years with experiencing such issues. So that's where most of all my experience and knowledge comes from. I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, so I have that clinical expertise also in the field.
Okay, excellent. So if we could start off with what would be defined as domestic violence, because I think that some people might have uncertainty that does that include, for example, emotional abuse? Does it include verbal abuse?
It does. So domestic violence can go both ways. It can be a male perpetrator, but it can also be a female perpetrator. Domestic violence against men is on the rise, and that's something we need to be cognizant of also. So domestic violence can equal to emotional abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, but it can also be financial abuse. And that's a part that we don't look at very often. So anything that is violating your rights, intimidating you, is unfair, and keeping you in a place where you don't want to be can be considered as domestic violence.
Mm-hmm. So I came across certain statistics. If you could tell me if this is actually true. I read that stats show that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men are victims of abuse. And then it said 53% of American Muslims experience a form of domestic violence, which could be emotional, physical, financial, spiritual. And 85% are women and 15% are men. Does it sound like that could be right to you?
Sounds very accurate. There is a high incidence of domestic violence, and I think it's very specific to our community because I believe that there's a lot of cultural overlap. And a lot of people who are perpetrators, are just walking this fine line. So they'll say, well, I'm not really abusing you, but I'm in charge. So they tend to use culture. I wouldn't say religion specifically because Islam doesn't allow for this at any level. But I think there are cultural overlays that come into part, and that's why I think the incidence is so high. A lot of people who follow Islam very specifically already know that even the one incident where there's no respect given to the husband by the wife, or the wife or the husband, your nikah is null and void. And I think a lot more education needs to happen in the Muslim community itself on what is specifically required by Islam and what protections both parties have. And I think once they come to understand that, then they're able to better understand what is going on.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. And I'm curious to know what you think, because I have met men who do have a very traditional perspective towards marriages and relationships, and they say, rightfully so, that, as the man, I am the imam of the family. I expect my wife to adhere to my requests, etc., etc. Now that's a very fine line, because where where does where does it begin and where does it end? Like the leadership, or how do I say this? How, as a wife, does she gauge that, okay, I don't really want to do this thing, but because this is my husband's right and he is my Amir, I am going to do A, B, or C according to his request, as opposed to, oh my God, he's just like a fat bully. And I'm just like, I just have to do whatever he says. I've got no freedom here. I feel like I'm suffocated. Um, I dread when he walks into the room, etc. So like, it's such a fine line. How does one distinguish between what's a healthy leadership, follower dynamic, as opposed to an abusive dynamic?
It it really needs a lot of education. You really need to be educated, you need to know your rights, and you do need to talk to somebody sometimes to help you kind of discern where that fine line is. Where are you falling on that line? Where are you on the spectrum? So a lot of women who came to see me, one of the masajid here was very proactive. They said, okay, talking to the imam isn't enough because the imam falls back into the traditional roles of, well, be kinder and listen more. And they said the community actually requested for a therapist. They said, we really need somebody with a little bit more expertise. So when they were able to explain it to me, kind of ask questions, like give them food for thought that they could think about to see, well, is this really Islamically applicable or does this fall into something else? But it's very tricky. People who want to bully and who want to be abusive, they use, different ways of power and control. For
Mm.
example, like, a husband would or a partner would say to the other partner, like, this is my right and you have to do this. But again, it goes all the way back to the beginning. Yes, you can demand all of these things once you are appropriately carrying out your role. So it can't be one-sided where you always have to listen to me, but when it comes for me to respect you, that's not going to happen.
So I guess you're saying that it requires an objective party who can make a more professional assessment, because it is so subjective. It's so subjective. Like
Yeah,
I'm just thinking, like if I'm just thinking that, like, if a traditional role couple had to sit in a therapist's office and the therapist was extremely progressive and an atheist, for example, he or she might say straight away, oh, this is like officially like an abusive relationship,
Mhm.
coming from that person's background. So they're projecting their perspective of how relationships should be. So it's so subjective, is it not?
It's very subjective, but it becomes a little bit more difficult when, say, you're from an immigrant family or you grew up in an immigrant family. So you were taught this is how we do things, although it's cultural, it's not necessarily Islamic. For example, the wife contributing, you know, the husband could be like, well, this is America, so it's 50-50. You have to contribute when Islamically you don't. But culturally, when uh, maybe one of the spouses knew that their parents came, but they were immigrants. So both of them like helped and they worked together to build a family. But just because that was what their experience was, may not be the norm. And even if it's a norm, everybody's has the right to make their individual choices.
Right.
And that's the thing. A lot of times people bully you into compromising your choice by giving you stories of, well, this is the norm and this is how it happened. And, using different ways to kind of intimidate you or blackmail you into feeling guilty. Like, oh, well, don't you want this for your children? And, what kind of a mother are you? Or what kind of a father are you that you won't do this thing. So it is dicey, but it's always good to get some professional. eyes on the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But given your experience, there is apparently a lot one needs to know regarding how to navigate the legal system if one is in a domestic violence situation. Could you please tell us something about that?
So, with the legal system, it becomes tricky. It varies from state to state. So, you really need to look into what rules and guidelines and different things happen in your state, and take a look into it. You can find out what are the recourses. One thing a lot of people with who go through domestic violence get the question later is, when all of this was happening, why didn't you go to the police? There are a couple of issues with that. First of all, once you take a complaint to the police, then in most states, at least in America, it becomes the state's issue. So sometimes you cannot take the report back, and then the state overtakes how they're going to go about the case and how they're going to prosecute the case. And a big thing in America, at least, it's also in some of the core areas. A lot of people are in the medical field, or a lot of people are in the IT field. And some people are business owners. Some people have different statuses that they're here. They could be on a green card. And what happens is when you do things legally, they could impact your status and your security clearance and your ability to work, because it is something that goes on one's record. So that's why a lot of people are hesitant to go and report it. Also, a lot of people are experiencing a heavy, consistent level of abuse. Should their partner know that they are now going to get legal help, I mean, most of the time, the person who's making the complaint is dependent on the other person. So they made a complaint and came home. Just imagine how much worse things can get. Or if the other person knows that other people know, now they have to be even more careful, and they can do things a different way. So those are the things that are most important with legal matters. A lot of people focus on what happens and the process and everything else, but just to get there is very difficult.
So what does one do if there is this fear that, oh my gosh, how am I going to report my spouse if there's such a huge amount of dependency here?
A lot of people don't.
Mm.
They don't report, or they can't report. So when they finally are in a situation where they have to leave, and they need to have the legal system to help protect them, maybe get a protective order, because they're so afraid the other spouse has made, very overt gestures and have said how they will hurt them and what the things they will do. And, they never really told anybody. But when they're leaving, when somebody leaves a domestic violence situation, whether they're dating or married, with kids, without kids, that is one of the most dangerous times. You can read several headlines and several news stories about how, a mother of two wanted to leave, and the husband, made sure that he ended all four of their lives or did something. So that is a very, very difficult situation. And that's why there are a lot of agencies that help domestic violence victims. They have therapists there, they have on retainer, they have lawyers who can sort of help maneuver that situation. But that's why it's so difficult. And that's why it's so unbelievable. Because somebody is like, well, if it was that bad, why didn't you report it? Why didn't you do something to stop it? And they don't understand how difficult it is. Once a person usually makes a decision and they know that it's too dangerous to stay, then they have to go and do all these things. So it's a huge burden on the victim.
Can you imagine?
So, when you're talking about the legal system, and you're working with somebody or talking to somebody who's experienced domestic violence, it is very helpful to link them up with the community resource that can give them added support, but also know and kind of let them know what to expect too. Some expectations of this is going to be difficult and how time consuming it's going to be and how it's going to be really hard for them to get through. So those are the things that are considered with the legal. It's not so easy as you reported it and the person who was being abusive was taken to task. It may not happen. And even when you file a legal case, you need witnesses, you need evidence, and because you really don't have much, it might be difficult to get any legal assistance that way. But not to lose hope. There are ways that you can go around things. And there are ways that you can build up your case. And that's why getting in touch with a local agency that kind of that has expertise in that field is very important.
Thank you. And regarding the lack of family and friend support, could you add to that?
A lot of people say, why do people in situations like this stay so long? Why do they not leave? One of the biggest things is they have been told by the abuser that if you told anybody, this is what would happen, the consequences. It could be anything from, the abuser will just say, well, she's lying or he's lying, and this never happened, and they'll rewrite history. But a lot of times when an abuser tries to at least get some information, right? They're in a situation, they're a little confused, they're being told something about them, and they just have this feeling that this isn't right or it's too much. It's not something that I want to deal with, especially in the cases of physical abuse or verbal abuse, physical abuse. And a lot of times the perpetrators are very careful. They know not to physically harm you sometimes because they know that they could have legal consequences. So they do a lot of things that don't leave any marks. They could take away your cell phone. They could turn off your data. They could take the keys from your car so you can't go to work. They can do a lot of things that, if you reported, well, that's not really abuse, but it is done in a manner to have power and control over you and to make you very vulnerable and keep you in a vulnerable state. So it is really difficult when you talk to somebody and you kind of want to tell them what's going on. And people are very concerned and they want to help. And in a lot of situations I've seen, they told somebody and they wanted to help them work it out and they sat them down, and the abuser totally had a different demeanor. They know how to behave in front of other people. So they're like, oh no, this didn't happen. They're trying to minimize everything. And it's also a lot of the things that they do, they violate you on such a level that it makes the person who's abused very ashamed to say what happened. And other people would judge them. Why did you let this happen? And they don't understand that sometimes the person who is being abused in a situation really does not have any say. They can't really stand up and say, no, I don't want to give you my money, or please don't talk to me that way. Or they've tried over and over again.
As you're talking, it sounds to me like a psychological thriller, because what you mentioned is one of the classic definitions of a narcissist is where in front of extended family and friends, he or she might be very charming, very skilled with, socially very likable, but at the home could be an absolute tyrant. And then if you say something, it's like, what? But he's such a great person, or she's such a wonderful person. And also when you mentioned that it's not like full on physical abuse, but it's the subtle things like hiding the keys, or it's like little, it's like a drop on a rock all the time, which can lead you to almost as a kind of an insanity because it's so subtle but it's like a
Yeah.
logical manipulation, right?
I mean, when the waves eventually they erode a beach. So it's like
Exactly.
little microaggressions here and there. And they also, play with your sense of fairness. And there's always an excuses of why it happened. And it's always blaming the victim. Well, you did this. If only you did this, this wouldn't happen. So there's a lot of mind games involved. So it becomes really difficult when you try to bring up the subject. Also, no, not quite sure of the exact number in recent research for the statistics, but it takes a person at least 7 good tries to leave a relationship. It's not like they've never done that before, but every time they want to leave up leaving, the abuser knows that, oh, they're about to lose all the power and control, and they change their behavior for a little bit. They make promises. Oh, we'll go to therapy. Oh, this will never happen again. And, sometimes they carry through too. Oh, well, I don't need your money. Here it is. You can have it. And then slowly later on, oh, the car broke down and, or the person's out of a job and suddenly they need help. So a lot of things that make sense. But it's really hard to get help because it's hard for people who are not experiencing abuse to understand the nature of abuse. So they're looking at it from a different lens. They're like, but how could that be? And you just talk and everything will be fine. If the other person must know, they can't understand that somebody's willingly, knowingly, and consciously doing this over and over again.
Or they might say, oh, but he's not hitting you, you know? He's not.
Yeah, that's always the thing too, because it boils down to physical and physical violence against you. So a lot of the times they can do everything financially, verbally, psychologically, but monetarily. But the thing is that there's this there's this feeling that unless you're not beaten and battered and bruised and end up in the hospital, that everything else is, oh, it's just, that's the way they are. And then the other thing is when somebody breaks down and tells somebody in the family and that person gets involved and tries to help, well, after that one meeting, then the abuser typically makes sure to sever that relationship. Does something to spoil that relationship with that family member so bad that it usually makes the abuser look really bad. And then they go ahead and distance themselves from that person.
So what advice would you give to a person who they are a family member of somebody who claims to be abused? What would be the right way to be there for the person, to follow through if somebody's coming to you and saying, this is what's going on in my home?
That's an excellent question. Number one, please believe the person. Because a lot of times this person has not been heard and has not been believed. And whether you are assessing the situation, because everybody has a sense of responsibility. They want to make sure they're doing the right thing. But just know that if somebody is coming to you, then just trust them and believe them. And then, like any other things, if you do not have any expertise in the matter, then make sure you refer the person to a proper place that does have the expertise. So if somebody came to me, which they often did at the mission, they're like, I think this and this is going on. Obviously, I had the clinical skills to assess the situation. So I asked questions and then I let them know of the resources, but I never judged them. And I also didn't say, oh my gosh, you're in a bad situation. You have to leave immediately. Kind of just give them the information. Because the other thing, the person who's been abused, their rights have been compromised. They've never had autonomy. They've never been able to make their own decisions. And the last thing you want to do is to also take that away from them. So you want them to give them information, point them out to their resources, and then let them in the end make their own decision. And like I said, sometimes it takes 7 times to leave. So maybe early on in the relationship, you can be like, I don't think this is quite right. And if you are able to point this person to the right place, maybe they can get all the knowledge and the information which with to make this decision. But usually when someone decides to leave this relationship, it takes a lot. It's not easy. And sometimes they need time. They need to think through. Because, going to the next part, when you start talking, a lot of people think you're the problem. Well, if only you would blah, 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 maybe she wouldn't yell at you like that. So there's a lot of judgment. So when somebody is talking to you, friends, family, you really need to suspend that judgment and you need to give a lot of information to the person with which they can make their own decisions. Be supportive.
Mm.
I think one thing that people overlook, I'm sure you've had this conversation with a lot of people, and a lot of people are probably saying the same things that I'm saying. Um, One thing also, when you go to friends and family, not only are you not believed and it's hard to support you, or sometimes friends and family dictate what you should be doing. Oh no, you're in a bad situation. You need to leave right now. And then if you don't, then they judge you on that and feel like you're not serious because if it were that bad, you should have left. Why are you continuing to stay? It must not be that bad. So then a lot of people pull back and they withhold their support. They withhold, they distance themselves from you. And one thing is important that if somebody has then contemplated, made this decision, and has gone out, to not make them feel guilty for that. Oh, what about the children? You never thought of the children. Every child needs a mother to look up to or a father to look up to. And that is that's a valid point. But at the same time, children don't need to see bad examples of behavior because then they might think that's the norm or that it's acceptable at some level. So that's the one thing. And then when people leave situations and then they've described how dangerous they were, no one wants them near them because they're afraid that the abuser will come and do something to them, which is rarely the case. The abuser usually is only after the abusee. Um, but that's something to note too. A lot of friends and family want to distance themselves because they don't want to get involved and they're scared because they have heard all these stories about what the abuser is capable of. And that's another thing. A lot of people say, why don't people leave? But where are they going to go? And then everybody sort of disowns them. So, really, to leave a situation, many times people have to do it in isolation. They have to have the strength and the courage and the resources to go out on their own. And of course, Allah's on their side and pray a lot. And a lot of women and a lot of men in these situations that I've spoken to have said that they did make a lot of prayer. They did a lot of dhikr. And then when the time is right, which is, Allah's timing is very different from ours, subhanAllah, a lot of doors open, a lot of resources open. One person described to me in specific that, you know, I met all these people that I haven't seen since then. They literally came into her life and were able to help her and give her the shelter and give her the strength and give her the courage. Was finding a place to live and was very scared. Like I can't go anywhere. And, one of her female friends was like, "Come here," and she's like, "But he's abusive. What if he shows up at the door?" And she's like, "Don't worry, I've got your back.
No.
Let him show up. We'll take care of it." So having that support is huge. And I don't blame anybody. It's a difficult situation where you're not understanding of what's going to happen. And then then you do believe that that person is so physically violent, you're also trying to protect yourself and you're trying to protect your home and your own family. But that's one of the biggest things. Why don't people leave? Because when they leave, they're going to be all alone. And no one wants to be alone. And many times the victim is the one that nobody believes because the person who's abused is so nice and so kind and so wonderful and so magnificent, and then goes on to lead what looks like a better life in front of everybody. So those are some of the key points to take away is believe the person, um, support them if you're able to, but also if you're not able to provide that support, not everybody is meant to put yourself in that situation, then redirect them to a place that they can and do it in a way that you're not being judgmental.
Do you have any advice for children who are a bit older, you could say from maybe adolescent age up, who are in an abusive family? What should they do?
For children, it's very difficult because they have loyalties to both parents. Um, and it's really hard because they really can't take sides, right? One is, one parent versus the other parent. It's really hard for them to decipher. A lot of resources are available to young adults. They have counseling centers and universities. At least in America, a lot of the companies that you work for have separate programs called employee assistance programs or EAPs. And any member of the family can usually call independently to get counseling. So just get a lot of support and talk to somebody and help them navigate you through this situation. That's the best because there is no right way, there's no wrong way. But just try to, I mean, the bottom line is just get a lot more information and make an informed decision. And then honestly, I cannot tell you the importance of praying 5 times a day and doing the dhikr. And a lot of people that I've gone through never left the hajj. And they said having that strong connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really helped them to navigate the situation too and be prepared. And to recognize that, at the end of the day, that's the only person that we have a true relationship with. Everything is just temporary. And once you shift your focus and are able to go into that zone, not worried about what material resources or what worldly things are going to happen, and focus a little bit more on the higher power and what is more important in your akhirah, then it becomes a totally different ballgame. At the same time, a lot of women who've come to me and they're like, but I have to do this, but I have to do that. And one thing I've told them is that you're an accomplice. Yes, the person is abusing you, but by allowing it, you are participating in something that is not right. And they get really shocked, huh? But I didn't do anything. I said you didn't do anything, but you're also not stopping. You know the hadith, like if you see something wrong, you have to physically go and stop it. And if you can't physically, you at least have to speak your mind. And if you can't speak your mind, then you have to at least believe it's wrong. And that is one of the lowest forms of your deen. So when people are reminded, not from a cultural sense and not from a worldly sense of, what will society say, but kind of bring you back to the basics of Islam. And I also try to tell the person, by allowing the abuser to abuse you, you're not helping them. Maybe they need a wake up call. Maybe they need to go to counseling and understand what they're doing. I'm a therapist, so of course I'm a believer. I believe miracles can happen, and sometimes they do. So getting help in a situation can maybe definitely better that situation or educate both partners into what is really going on and what options they have.
Can you share any miraculous stories you've come across?
I've come across so much. I came across the story of one person who, after a quarter of a century of being married, had to leave, and no one believed them. They had a hard time knocking on doors. Nobody would give them the support. And this was the person that I think I was referencing earlier, where she finally found, again, she said, I went back to my dean. I, prayed 5 times a day. I asked Allah directly. And she had been praying over the years too. But I guess the time wasn't right. And at this time, literally, people came into her life. They said, we have a place where you can store your stuff. We have a sofa for you to sleep on. Got in touch with the local community agency that was able to do counseling with them, got the legal help that they need. Got vouchers to go to places to get all the household items you needed to set up your new home. And truth prevails and people see. So in the beginning, a lot of people didn't understand. They're like, but you were always smiling, but you never said anything. And then that's when this person had to educate their people or had a protective order. And a lot of people are like, oh, he would never hurt you. And she said, well, he kind of crushed my thumb and broke my ring finger and left a scar on my face. And they're like, but you said you fell in the bathroom. You said you were moving furniture. So it was really hard for them to believe. And this person just said, listen, I know you don't believe it. I'm not asking you to believe it, but just protect me. Don't let my place be shared because, what are you going to say? Are you going to be standing over my grave one day and said, oh, we never thought he would harm her? And she had to put it in such a way to get people to really kind of wake up and understand. And so that's what they did. They, didn't know what to believe. They didn't want to make any judgments, but they tried to show no judgment with this person. And through counseling, she was able to stay strong and be able to navigate things through. Fast forward a couple of years later, the protective order finishes, the divorce is finalized, the house is sold. A lot of the family doesn't believe in anything, but it's a different way of being. When you are in a relationship that is not very supportive, you can't really live your best life. So when this person, everything was said and done, they were able to live their best life. They were not acting from a place of fear or of desperation. They were able to do different things. They concentrated on themselves, kind of stayed away from society, and then build themselves back up to what they were capable of. And eventually, it's really about the energy that you put into the world. There was such negative energy about this person that, it attracted all the negative people. But once she had this positive energy, she attracted a lot of positive people. And, a couple of years down the road, people could see, you know, maybe you were in a bad situation because you're so different now. I mean, we can tell from your Facebook profile picture that you just look so much more happier. Yeah, this person wasn't stressed, so they weren't worrying too much about finances when they went out. They were more pleasant to be around because, and they were not constantly in the back of their mind thinking about all the things that were going wrong. So a couple of years down the road, this person is a totally different person. People can see it, people love it. Yeah, and you will lose a lot of friends, right? You will lose a lot of people that you had in your life, but then you'll find so many more. The other thing that's really important in all of this to carry away is that no one likes change. Everybody's very comfortable. And it's really hard to put yourself in a different situation. Nobody wants to leave their home. Everybody's comfortable with the circle of friends that they're with, and nobody wants to rock the boat. But people who are experiencing this, working with professionals, can help them to see that you will have a different situation that may be not better, but that may be just better for you. So I have seen people spring back. I've seen people rebuild their lives, find the respect that they need, find a new circle of friends that understand. Um, so I'm very hopeful, very, very hopeful.
That's beautiful. Very optimistic. Another question, Tabassum. Have you ever come across somebody who feigned that they were being abused and they went through this whole story and then to find out that actually it was untrue?
Uh, it's difficult because as a therapist, you only see them when they come to see you. And you really don't know what's going on in their real lives. But there are cases, and there are a lot of cases that um, there are a lot of women who are, or girls in specific, because this is what I have knowledge of. It could be men also, but that are getting married from countries overseas and coming into the US. And it's happened in the community, and they come and they get married, and all the festivities are going on in the house. Somebody said that we went on the door and the police is here. And they said, "What happened?" They said, "We got a call that this person is being abused." And it's usually the bride that's here. And they're like, "We're just got married, like it's been a day or two." So somehow they know how to work the system. The one or two cases I'm talking about, they came here, they got married, they made sure that they took all the gold and all the gifts that they got and said that they were being abused, called the police, and the police took them off and gave them all the resources because now, at least in America, because that was happening a lot when people would get married overseas and bring the other spouse here, they were controlling them, saying, well, you don't have any standing here, and they're in the process of getting their green card. So a lot of people wouldn't leave domestic violence situations because it would compromise their citizenship process. But a lot of people now know exactly what to do, and there have been a couple of cases, and this is there might be more, and it could also be like the guys coming here and doing the same thing, but I only found out about the females that are coming here, and they're coming after a year and they call the cops and say I'm being abused, and take all the gold and all the money, and they leave, and are able to get their green cards on their own. And it's been devastating for the families here because it's such a violation of trust. So those are specifically the cases that, I mean, in 2 days, I mean, it could have happened. I'm not saying, but the way that they had planned and executed and things happen, it seemed like they had come here with an agenda to do that.
Wow.
So those are some of the cases to be have some knowledge of.
Mhm.
But in general, abuse is such a thing that nobody would make this kind of stuff up. Nobody would make things up that would put them. Usually, humans have a tendency to share things that make them look good and not make them look this bad. So if they're saying something, it's probably true.
Tabassum, have you ever seen a situation where a perpetrator has changed and reformed?
I have not personally seen a situation, but then I also want to let you know that a lot of people come for counseling and then they leave. So there's not a lot of follow up that I have. So they may have changed, they could have changed, but I don't really have any concrete knowledge of that. We'd have to do like some studies and follow up and get to that. And I've never been in a situation where we could follow up like that. Um, in some cases, again, I would like to believe that if these are cultural tendencies once brought to the attention of the abuser, and that's why I say education is very important at first. Do they even know that what they're doing, or is this just what they've seen? and they feel like it's okay because they are familiar with it. And that's what happens a lot of time. The person who's being abused doesn't know their rights. So they also go along with it. So then the abuser is very confused, like, what happened? This is what happens in our culture. This is the way things are. But that's why education is so important, by letting them know that this is not correct. Or if this is the way you'd like to operate, it's still not acceptable to me. Giving them the choice to make different decisions, I think, is really important.
I'm just wondering, how would that education look like? Would it be something like, we in our masjid, we really recommend that for prospective couples to please attend certain workshops prior to deciding to get married? Because usually when people do premarital counseling, it's more about like, are you guys compatible? What are your visions, etc., etc. But this is almost, it's bigger than that. It's like, it's so subtle. It's like, what is it that actually constitutes as being abuse? It's like deconstructing these maybe negative cultural aspects. Yeah, what
Mhm.
what, what does that look like in your opinion, to have to educate people? Because it's unlikely if someone's going to be like, I want to marry so and so. I think I'm going to go take a workshop about domestic violence awareness. It's very unlikely that type of thing would happen.
I mean, a lot through counseling, for sure. You'd have to go and see a therapist. And talking about this specific topic, I had a couple who was non-Muslim who came into my office, and they were just dating and were considering getting married, and the male in the situation was very hesitant. So of course the female's like, well, let's go to, couples counseling to see what the issues are. And when I met with him one-on-one, it was her that was very abusive.
Mhm.
He's like, she's not doing, obviously there was no physical violence, but there was implied physical violence. She would take his phone and throw it against the wall, and it would crash, and a lot of other situations. So he's like, I don't know if I really want to get engaged to this person because I'm not feeling comfortable. So in the counseling sessions, I had to educate him on domestic violence because uh, internationally, most of the time, we're always thinking a man is abusing a woman. And we never think that a woman can also have the tendencies of not engaging healthily in a relationship. So now what happened to them after they left my office, I don't know. But I would like to believe that sometimes if it is brought to your attention that what you're doing is incorrect, that at least you have the opportunity to make the changes that you need to.
Mhm. Right. That kind of data would be fascinating, because I do like to believe in redemption, that Toba and transformation. Yeah. So when it comes to finances, what should one know regarding finances? I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about the financial abuse, why people might be afraid to get out based on finances, what did you want to focus on?
So, one of the many reasons why people also don't leave is they don't have the money to leave.
Mhm.
I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but at least in America, if you want to get an apartment or find a place to stay, it's quite expensive. And then also you have to have a job or have a means of income to even qualify for an apartment. I know one person who had a full-time job who was ready to leave and was having a hard time finding a place to stay. Nobody wanted to rent to them because they were afraid that, the abuser would show up at their house and do something. And when she went to an apartment complex to sign on for an apartment, they have you do an application and said, well, your income is too low to rent, you know, a bigger apartment, and you would have to have somebody to co-sign that lease. And no one really wants to take that, financial burden onto themselves. So finances in that way, it's really difficult. Usually a person maintains power and control by making sure that the person they're abusing doesn't have the resources to leave. And resources can include money, can include family, can include friends, can include not knowing about what's available to them. So that's something to pay attention to. And then also, usually when you leave, it turns into a legal situation and you need money for a lawyer. And most lawyers in the US won't even talk to you until you give them $5,000 as a retainer fee. And then it quickly escalates from that. Because every time the lawyer talks to you, it's $450. Every 10, 15 minutes they talk to somebody else, it's another $450. I had a client whose lawyer was charging her for going to the library to do research on domestic violence cases to help her case.
That's
And
so what
it
is the person supposed to do? What is the person supposed to do? If they have all these limitations, nobody wants to rent to me because of this, I can't afford legal fees. What's the next option?
that's why a lot of people tend to stay and don't go. Option is to beg and borrow and get the money to at least get through the situation and get through it, and then figure it out later. So a lot of people I know have then had to go to family and friends and be like, hey, I'm in this situation. Not only are they not believing her, but or him, but on top of it, they're having to shell out thousands of dollars to help. And then it becomes really a strange relationship because on one hand, they're not really believing them. And then, a lot of people are like, well, aren't they going to listen to the woman? Or for most of the time, they're like, don't they always listen to her? Aren't there resources available? How could this be? But it is. When I was working, giving parenting classes for parents who were separating. And at least in the state that I am, you have to take classes. Both parents are required to take classes on how to raise their children and co-parent in a positive way. I had someone saying that I'm married to, my husband's whole family are lawyers. And they are very big lawyers in legal firms. And what also happens, at least in the laws and rules of our state, is that if you say, I have gone to speak to a lawyer, then my spouse cannot retain that lawyer because I've already spoken to them. So this one non-Muslim couple came in and she said that I'm having such a hard time finding any good lawyers because the husband in the situation had a lot of money and had this legal background. And so he went and had a consultation with 12 different lawyers to make sure, because he had unlimited amounts of money and he had, a lot of parents were in the legal system. So he talked to all the good lawyers and got consultations with them to make sure that the wife could not retain them.
Wow, that's so manipulative. Like
It
who
is.
thinks of that?
So this is the stuff financially. And then financially, you have to find a place to stay. You have to pay for your own food. You have to probably get a new cell phone. You have to probably get new car. You have to probably get new car insurance. I mean, it's establishing a whole household by yourself. So financially, it's very taxing. Usually, when you're establishing a household, you don't have other bills that are coming along with it, or you're able to minimize them, or you're able to put things off. But here, everything hits you at once. So that's one thing that I would tell people is to be ready to, from somewhere, secure money. And that's why a lot of people sometimes, that's why you have to go get educated. Because maybe there might, you need to go, you'll need a lot of money. You may need some time to go ahead and save up something to have. And a lot of people really don't want to help you. They're like, oh, well, why didn't you ask for help? You're like, but I did. And you said no. So a lot of people get disheartened too, because they're in a situation where they really don't want to talk to anybody. There's so fears of embarrassment, being ashamed, being blamed for staying for so long. And then on top of that, then you're asking them, why didn't you leave earlier? And then when they do, nobody really wants to support them in the ways that are meaningful that will help them get on their own two feet.
Yes, so it's clear how challenging it is to be in a domestic violence situation because the odds are huge, and how essential it is to find some kind of support. I'm sure even if it just means having like a good friend, somebody who has your back, can make all the difference. Tabassum, in closing, do you have any advice for somebody who might be listening to this, who is in a situation that they need to get out of? What could they do immediately?
One thing is to get educated on what the process is like in the place that you are. What are the laws? What are the resources available? Where you would need to go to get what you need to take the step. Second of all, to not be disheartened. There's a reason why you're being brought to this point. There's a reason why you are being given an option to choose a different way to live out your life. I think taqwa is the strongest thing, honestly, boils down to that. Just believing that Allah has a plan for you and knowing that, life is really not supposed to be easy. Everybody has different challenges, and this just may be yours. But also to have a firm belief that you cannot participate in something that is not right, because then again, that's your part of the responsibility. So once you let go of the guilt, once you let go of the shame, and once you cross over to, okay, what am I going to do about this situation? Um, that then take that and keep that, and keep your dialogue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask for help, and definitely you'll get through it. And interestingly enough, just when you think you've hit rock bottom and things can't get worse, they'll probably get worse at least 10 more times. And to be prepared for that, know that this is something that you're going to go through. I always like to give the example that, when do you get built? When you go for exercise, physical exercise. How do we make muscles? How do we get definition? You literally have to break down your muscles. And in the repair is that definition that you're looking for. So know that, and also know that, the only constant in life is change. So nothing can stay the same forever. It might seem like it is, but it can't. That's the laws of nature. So even though you're in a situation where it's really, really bad, it'll eventually change. Something will shift. But just be prepared for the long haul. Prepared for this to be a process of maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 years. And once you have clear expectations, then you can get the energy to stay the course. It's kind of like doing a master's degree or any degree for that matter. 4 years undergrad. Okay, this is what it's going to be like. I might not be able to take vacations, and at the end, I'm going to be in debt so much. But you do it because you know that that education, that process, that learning process will better your life. And to know that a lot of people have said, "I'm so happy I'm not in that situation anymore." And then that they had more options available and were able to then enter very positive and supportive relationships.
Mm.
And also for a lot of parents out there, or a lot of aunties and uncles out there, is that you did something so difficult, but you also set such a great example for young people to know that they have choices. Yeah, it's very positive. It's a positive change. It's not very happy, but again, it's like personal training. When you're going to work out, you break out those muscles, you're sore, and when you go to the gym, it doesn't take a few times. It doesn't take a month. I can tell you from experience. It takes a good year. It takes a good 2 years to get yourself into the condition that you want. So if physically it takes the body that long just to be more conditioned, then here you are changing everything. Your body, your heart, your mind, your way of engaging with the community, who you are, you may not even know. It's a long process, but I mean, if you definitely stick with it, it'll be worth it.
Thank you, Tabassum.
Promise.
That was excellent advice. And if somebody wants to reach out to you, are they able to contact you?
They can contact me. I am available for speaking engagements, though. I'm not really taking any clients per se,
Okay.
at this point because I do have a full-time job that I'm concentrating on, and I'm not available for private practice. But if anybody wanted me to talk to a group or do a speaking engagement like that, they definitely can get in touch.
Okay, I'll share information. Thank you so much. Really
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
Salam.
Appreciate you giving me the opportunity of talking about this. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I just wanted to help anybody who's in this difficult process.
Mhm. Thank you. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum.
Okay.